Space exploration. Who made the first rockets? The Chinese made the first rockets about 1000 years ago, but they were more like fireworks than today's space rockets. They were flaming arrows that were fired from a basket using gunpowder. Who can build rockets? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to build rockets. Lots of people make mini rockets as a hobby. There is even a yearly contest when people show off their latest creations. Is it true? The Thrust SSE a rocket-powered car? No. Thrust SSE, the fastest car, has two jet engines. A jet engine could not power a space mission because it needs air and there is no air in space. When did the first liquid fuel rocket fly? In 1926, American Robert Goddard launched a 3.5-meter long rocket. It flew about as high as a two-story house, nowhere near outer space, and landed 56 meters away. The flight lasted just 2.5 seconds. Who built a rocket for war? Wernher von Braun invented the V-2, a rocket missile used by the Germans in World War II. After the war, von Braun moved to the United States to help with the new American space program. Why do we need rockets? Rockets are important for space travel. They are the only machines powerful enough to launch things into space, such as satellites, probes and people. All the parts needed to build space stations have been carried up by rockets. Which is the biggest satellite so far? The European Ariane rocket could carry a fully grown elephant. Ariane's biggest payload, cargo, so far is a satellite which weighed 4.6 tons. How fast can a rocket go? To escape from Earth's gravity, a rocket has to reach 40,000 kilometers per hour, almost 20 times faster than supersonic Concorde. Once it is out in space, the rocket drops down to around 29,000 kilometers per hour to stay in orbit. Is it true? Saturn V rockets were as tall as a 30-story building. Yes, at 111 meters high, the Saturn V was the tallest rocket ever made. Most of the rocket fell away once it has done its job. Why do rockets fall to pieces? Rockets are made in stages or pieces. Usually, there are 3 stages made up of the fuel and rocket engines. Each stage drops off when its job is done. It takes a huge amount of power to push a heavy rocket into space. Which is the first living creature from Earth sent to space? The first living creature in space was a Russian dog called Laika. She made a 7-day journey in the space capsule Sputnik 2 in November 1957. Who was the first man in space? A young Russian pilot called Yuri Gagarin was the first person in space. He orbited the Earth in a small capsule called Vostok 1 on 12th April 1961. His journey lasted less than 2 hours. Who was the first woman in space? The first woman in space was a Russian too. Valentina Tereshkova made a 3-day space journey in Vostok 6 in 1963. The first American woman in space was Sally Ride in 1983. Who took the first spacewalk? The cosmonaut, Russian astronaut Alexei Leonov took a 10-minute spacewalk on 18th March 1965. To make sure he didn't float off, Leonov tied himself to his capsule. Is it true a chimp could survive a space flight? Yes. Ham was the first to try out the Mercury capsule in 1961. Despite traveling at 8,045 kilometers per hour, the chimpanzee survived the 16-minute flight. Which astronauts went to the sea. American astronauts returning to Earth landed in the sea and were picked up by helicopter. Their capsule had huge parachutes to slow down their fall and rubber rings so that they could float. How hot is the capsule when it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere? Capsules got extremely hot. When a capsule re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, its surface heated it up to 3000 Celsius, twice the temperature needed to melt iron. But they didn't melt because they were protected by a special heat shield. Who came down to Earth with a bang? Russian capsules landed on hard ground. The cosmonauts bailed out and parachuted down the last few kilometers. But even so, man broke a few bones. They usually had to spend months in hospital recovering from the landing. Who knew where astronauts landed? Machinery on board a capsule was radio, linked to mission control, the people on the ground in charge of a space mission. This meant people knew exactly where to find the astronauts, usually. Is it true Vostok 2 got lost? Yes, Vostok 2 was the capsule carrying Alexei Leonov, the first spacewalker. The autopilot machinery went wrong and the capsule ended up 1000 kilometers off course in a snowy forest. Who first set foot on the moon? The very first person to step on the moon was the American Neil Armstrong in 1969. He had down there in Apollo 11 with Buzz Aldrin, who followed him onto the moon's surface, and Michael Collins. How many moon missions were there? There were 6 manned Apollo landing on the moon and about 80 unmanned ones too. Apollo 17 landed the last astronauts on the moon in 1972. Is it true there are footsteps on the moon? Yes, there is no atmosphere on the moon, which means there is no wind either. Tire tracks and footprints in the dusty surface will be there for 100 years. Who first drove on the moon? In 1971, Apollo 15 carried a lunar rover. David Scott and James Irwin drove the battery-powered buggy over the moon's cratered surface, collecting samples of moon rock. Is it true there is only room for 5 astronauts aboard the shuttle? No. The space shuttle was designed to carry 8 astronauts, but it can carry 10 at a pinch. What was the first reusable spacecraft? The space shuttle was the first spacecraft designed to be used more than once. Not every part is reusable because it needs new rocket boosters for each flight. The shuttles have made over 100 missions into a space. The first was Columbia, which blasted off in 1981. It orbited the Earth at about 27,840 kilometers per hour, about 10 times faster than a speeding bullet. How many space shuttles are there? There are 3 space shuttles in use today: Discovery, Atlantis, and Endeavour. The shuttle Challenger exploded shortly after the liftoff in 1989, and the shuttle Columbia disintegrated, re-entering the Earth's atmosphere in 2003. Shuttles are used for launching and repairing satellites and space research. How does the shuttle land? At the end of its mission, the shuttle drops its speed to break orbit on the opposite side of the world to the place it wants to land. Then it turns off its engines and glides like a bird, landing on a runway about an hour later. Why do astronauts wear spacesuits? Spacesuits act like a suit of armor. They stop at astronauts' blood boiling in space and reflect the sun's dangerous ray. They have a built-in backpack containing an oxygen supply battery and cooling system. How astronauts are kept cooled? Astronauts are water-cooled. A system of tubes seen into the space suit carries cool liquid around to keep the astronaut's temperature normal. Is it true? Cosmonauts took off in their underwear? Yes, in the early days of Russian space travel, spacesuits were worn only for spacewalks. Some cosmonauts just wore their underwear at taken-off time. Do astronauts wear spacesuits all the time? No, they wear them for spacewalks and during takeoff landing or when they dock with another craft. The rest of the time, astronauts wear shorts and t-shirts. How do you go to the toilet in a spacesuit? Astronauts often need to wear during takeoff. Women wear an extra absorbent nappy inside their suit. Some men prefer to do this too, but others wear a special sleeve that carries wear to a storage pouch inside the suit. What's on the menu in space? Astronauts either add water to waterless food or they eat ready meals such as stew or pasta. Canned fruit, puddings, biscuits, sweets and gum are all on the menu too. Is it true? Astronauts eat freeze-dried ice cream? No. Astronaut ice cream sold in the shops is not really eaten in space. But on the Mir space station, American astronauts took out an ice cream feast to share with the Russian cosmonauts. Why doesn't the food float away? Everything floats about in space, so meals are eaten from trays stuck to astronauts' clothes. Drinks come in a cup with a lid and are sucked up through a straw. Do astronauts get space sickness? Some astronauts get space sickness. Floating makes many astronauts throw up. And if they're not careful, the sick flies everywhere. Luckily, the sickness wears off after a day or two. How do astronauts wash? The Skylab space station had a shower fitted with a vacuum cleaner to suck off the water, but there is no room for a shower on the shuttle. Astronauts use wet wipes and clean their hair with rinseless shampoo. Is there any spider in space? There were spiders in space. Arabella and Anita had a special mission on Skylab. Scientists wanted to see if space affected how spiders spin webs. Which was the first space station? The first manned space station was Salyut 1, launched in 1971, which had room for 3 crew. It was meant to go into permanent orbit around the Earth, but its orbit was a bit too low. What happens in a space station? Astronauts live in space stations for weeks or even months. They do experiment and find out more about space. They also do lots of exercise to stay fit and healthy. Is it true? Your bones get weaker in space. Yes, this is not serious on short missions, but no one knows what would happen if you spent a year in space. Which is the biggest space station? The International Space Station, ISS, is the biggest ever space station. The first module was launched in 1998 and the space station's parts are being built by 16 countries. Who needs a toolkit in space? Astronauts need tools to build the ISS and repair satellites. In 1993, a space shuttle crew repaired the Hubble Space Telescope. What is an MMU? MMU stands for Manned Maneuvering Unit. It's like an armchair that carries an astronaut around in space when he or she is outside the spacecraft. It uses 24 little gas jets to move backwards or forward, up or down. Is it true the space shuttle has an arm? Yes, it has a robot arm with a hand that can grip at the end. It can be controlled by astronauts inside or outside the shuttle. The robot arm is useful for picking up objects in space. Where astronauts are trained? Astronauts train underwater. Working underwater gives astronauts an idea of how it will feel to float in space. Water makes an astronaut's body move in the opposite direction when they try pull or push something, just as it would in space. How do astronauts talk to each other? Space is an airless vacuum that won't carry sound. Even if they were yelling, astronauts outside their craft wouldn't be able to hear each other, so they stay in touch by radio. Has anyone ever been to Mars? No, not yet. Anyway, the distance from Earth to Mars varies from 56 million kilometers to 400 million kilometers. Even at its closest, Mars would be a 6-month journey away. Is it true Vikings landed on Mars? Yes. In 1979, 2 space probes called Viking 1 and 2 landed there. During their mission, they collected samples and took over 3,000 photos. What used balloons to land on Mars? The Mars Pathfinder probe entered the Martian atmosphere on 4th of July 1997. It used a parachute and rockets to slow down and then a bundle of balloons inflated around it so that it could bounce safely down onto the surface. Where did the Pathfinder landed in Mars? The Pathfinder landed in a river. Although there is no liquid water on Mars now, the rocky plain where the Pathfinder touched down showed signs that water had flowed there once. Which robot explored Mars? The Pathfinder carried a robot car called Sojourner, which was radio-controlled from Earth. It had a camera and devices for studying the soil and rock. Which was the first satellite in space? Sputnik 1 was the first satellite to orbit the Earth. It was launched by the Russians in October 1957 and took 90 minutes to circle the planet. Is it true a person could have fitted in Sputnik 1? No. The satellite was less than 60 centimeters across, smaller than most beach balls. Sputnik was just a radio transmitter, really, but it was very important for space exploration. Can you see any satellites from Earth? Yes, you can see satellites moving across the sky when the sun is shining on them, but it's dark on the Earth. The best times to spot satellites are the 2 hours after sunset and the 2 hours before sunrise. How satellites are powered by the sun? Satellites are powered by the sun. Rocket power takes satellites up into orbit, but once they are there, they use special solar panels to collect energy from the sun. This is turned into electricity to power the satellite's batteries. Why don't satellites fall down? Earth's gravity tries to pull a satellite down, but the satellite's speed as it orbits the Earth tries to fling it into space. Usually, the two forces cancel each other out, but there have been mistakes. Which probe snapped a comet? The Giotto space probe visited Halley's Comet in 1986 and took brilliant photos of the comet's rocky core. Even though Giotto kept a safe distance of about 600 kilometers, its special protective shields got covered in icy dust. Do you know there is a probe carrying message for aliens? A probe carries a message for aliens. The Pioneer 10 probe was fitted with a plaque, just in case it's ever found by aliens. It shows a man and a woman and a map to show where Earth is in the universe. Is it true a probe was made out of junk? Yes. Magellan, sent to visit Venus in 1989, was made up of spare parts from other missions. Which spacecraft flew farthest? Voyager 2, launched in 1977, has flown past Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Now it is beyond our solar system, heading into interstellar space. Which probe was as big as a bus? The bus-sized Cassini space probe had another probe called Huygens on board. It reached Saturn in 2004. Cassini beams data back to Earth about Saturn's rings, moon, and the planet itself. Is it true we could never breathe on Mars? No. We couldn't breathe in the atmosphere there as it is, but we could build airtight cities and grow plants there that would make oxygen for us. Might there be pirates in space? If we ever set up space mining stations, spacecraft would zoom about the solar system with very valuable cargoes. Space pirates might try to board cargo-carrying craft to rob them. Will we ever live on the moon? There might be a moon base one day. The moon is only 3 days away, and its low gravity makes it easy to land spacecraft there. It would be a good place for telescope because there is no atmosphere to distort the pictures. Is it possible building hotels in space? Yes, people are planning a space hotel. Holidays in space are not far off. There are plans for a donut shuttle space hotel using old shuttle fuel tanks as rooms. Will we ever live on other planets? It will take a lot more probe missions before we could consider building bases on other planets. But if travel to other stars ever became possible, the outer planets could act as useful petrol stations.